Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. We are about to get started here, and we've got a few special guests here. We've got Sarah from our CSNP education team. Welcome aboard, Sarah. Good to see you.
Hey, David, nice to be here.
Before we introduce myself and our guest, would you like to give a shout out to our education team before we start?
Yeah, this is my first webinar. So, hello, everyone. I am the education director here at CSNP. Just want to say a quick shout out to the education team, David, Tony, Elaine. Um, been working with these guys for the last few weeks to get up to speed and hopefully offer you some good content. So, happy to be here.
Cool. Good to see you, Sarah. All right. So yes, I'm David Lee. I've been helping CSNP with content such as the podcast and these webinars and everything. So our mission is to really make security education accessible for all walks of life. So we're happy to have you this evening. We've got a very special guest. We have Chloe Messdaghi from Point 3 Security, and our topic today is hacker rights. So, Chloe, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it from here.
Excellent. Well, I'm just glad to be here. Hi, everyone, and good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so excited to do this talk with you because it's so dear to my heart. So I'm going to try to wrap it up as fast as possible of this talk, so then I can answer any questions that you may have. But yeah, let's just dive into it, shall we? Might as well. All right. Wonderful. Can you all see my screen? Perfect. Let's do this. Welcome to Hacker Rights. So I just want to say that this talk is completely dedicated to every single hacker out there who's scared to disclose, to the hackers who've been prosecuted for trying to do something good or just actually doing their job, believe it or not, and to all the people who are in the fight to bring rights for hackers, and to you. Thank you. My name is Chloe Messdaghi, and I'm the co-founder of Hacking is Not a Crime. I'm a co-founder of WOSEC and the founder of We Are Hackers. That is my URL. If you want to know anything about me, it is on there most likely. And feel free to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. My DMs are always open. All right, now let's get into the stuff that why you were here for. So for those that aren't aware of what is Hacking is Not a Crime, it's an organization that I created with Brian that basically we wanted to be a one-stop shop for every single hacker out there to know who is a good resource to have, but also what are the resources out there to protect them? What are the things that they need to know when hacking in our today's age? So Hacking is Not a Crime is the go-to place for you to learn everything possible about hacker rights and also where we stand, but also all the organizations and advocates out there that are trying to change where we stand today. But first, for those that are not aware of a hacker versus an attacker, let me just talk about that really fast, because I think a lot of times when we hear the term hacker, it's something negative. When in reality, hackers are actually good people. They're on the good side. They are the security researchers. They're the ones that are hacking to protect and serve you. And they don't exploit unless they have permission. But now an attacker, which is the correct term to use, are the more negative players in our space, which is the criminal, the cyber criminal, the malicious actor. These are people that have a criminal intent. So at the end of the day, if you're trying to figure out what is the difference between a hacker and attacker, it depends on the intent. Was the intent to protect and serve? Then that's a hacker. Was the intent to do something malicious for something for you to earn something in return? That would be a criminal intent, and that would make you an attacker. So it's important to understand that there's two very different sides of this. They use the exact same skill set, but for different intent and for different reasons. And I'm not talking about attackers today, I'm talking about hackers today. But let's first paint the picture of what it looks like right now. And spoiler alert, there's an unhappy face here for a reason. Because we don't have rights. We'll just put it out there right now. We don't have any rights. We have zero protections, people. That's something you need to know. Now, the one thing to note is that we are always cautiously on the line of when reporting vulnerabilities. So this is one of the cases I like to bring out. This story is about Kevin, and Kevin, he came across DJI. They had a bug bounty program, which they did within house. That means they didn't host it on HackerOne or BugCrowd. They just went and did it themselves. Now, there were some red flags at the very beginning because he wanted to confirm what they stated, what is in scope. And when he emailed them, it took them 2 weeks to respond. So this is already letting you know that there could be a management issue of this bug bounty program that they just released. Now, he found something, reported it, and they were going to give him $30,000 for his findings. But in return, to sign the contract to receive the funds, it didn't have any protection for him. So he walked away from the $30K. But what happened was DJI was very concerned of what this could be for bad PR. They were worried that he could go after them. He could go out in public and talk about the vulnerability. And so what they did was a fear tactic. They served him a lawsuit tied to the CFAA. And that's something you're going to want to learn about. It's the CFAA. Now, don't worry, I will give you a brief overview of what it is. But basically, because of that, he didn't know what to do. But what he did do in the end was that he posted on his blog all communication that DJI ever had with him publicly, and they actually withdrew the lawsuit. And it's one of those unfortunate moments because I would like to say this is one of those rare cases, but it's not. It happens quite a bit, is that people in our industry are being handed lawsuits. So how do we fix this situation exactly? Well, first we need to influence the public cycle. As many of you that maybe attended this event, you never knew that there was a difference between a hacker and attacker. You've always heard hacker as a negative way. And the reality is that in order to get hacker rights and protection, so then Kevin could have had some legal protection because he did all the right things, is that we have to change legislation. If we're going to have any changes in this world, we need to have legislation change. And so in order to change public perception, is that we have to work with the media, organizations, that's also companies, and legislation. So with our congressmen, it's really important that we work across all three of these elements to be able to change where we stand today. To be able to get rights, you need to have influence, and influence works through media organizations, legislation. Very key point there. But the first thing you have to learn about the public cycle, I would say, is that public perception is the thing that we are trying to do. By changing public perception, it allows us to start having that conversation about what are hackers and who are we. And the thing you need to understand is how human behavior works, because we have to challenge some things. And the term you're going to hear multiple times throughout this talk is called a socially constructed belief. Socially constructed beliefs are basically an idea that was created and accepted by yourself and by society. So for example, if you grew up watching movies and the hacker is always the bad person, and you see them always wearing hoodies in a basement and images of of a hacker in a basement, and you just basically have this idea that hackers are bad people. And this is something that you see quite a bit. And so this is a socially constructed belief, is that hackers are bad people. And because of that, that's why we haven't had any changes, is because we have to change public perception to be able to change that. So how do we change public perception? Well, let's start talking about your brain. And you probably did not see us going into cognitive science, but we are certainly going into cognitive science. So let's first dive into this. So remember those socially constructed beliefs, those things that you start believing because of things that you read, you hear, people telling you, you see on TV, in movies. Well, guess what? That gets stored somewhere in your brain. And what ends up happening is that you kind of categorize things that are safe, not safe. And by not safe are things that are not like you. I want you to understand this, because this is how stereotypes stay out there. Is that people are afraid of things that are not like them, or not within their community, or not within their bubble of their life. And so they have a fear because of it. And this is where stereotypes live and thrive, because socially constructed beliefs, if you haven't figured it out, are also stereotypes. That's right. So stereotypes, things that are not actually true. And so I want you to understand that what ends up happening is that these memories are stored in your brain. Now, I want to give you an example that you'll have a better idea of how this works, this pattern. So this is how the pattern works, okay? There's someone walking down the street, they have pink hair. This person with pink hair, you've never really seen them before, we'll just put it out there, but also that every time you turn on the TV and you're watching a movie or a TV show, the person with the pink hair happens to be the bad guy always. When you're reading in a book and in the line it says, and the person had pink hair, you're like, bad guy, immediately, it's gotta be a bad guy. So you have internalized this fear of someone with pink hair because you have been told since you were young, indirectly from people around you, by your society, by your bubble, your community, the people that you look up to, and things that you've read and seen on the TV screen. People with pink hair are bad, dangerous criminals. Now let's take it to another step. So what ends up happening is you're walking down the street, and when you're walking down the street, someone with pink hair is behind you. And at that moment, you have this part of your brain called the amygdala. It gives a warning sign. It's like warning, warning, alert, alert. Someone with pink hair is right behind you. You must act. So the amygdala sends this message to the prefrontal cortex. Now, the one thing you need to know is that what's happening in the amygdala is completely subconscious. You're not aware of it. However, it sends a warning to the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain. And what happens is that it acts like the CEO of your brain, where it tells it whether or not the amygdala needs to simmer down or to act on it. So this person with pink hair is behind you. And in the front of your brain, you're like, you remember all these memories of what you've seen in the media, things that you've heard about, that pink hair people are dangerous. So you're like, all right, what can I do right now? I have to think of solutions really quick. It depends on my survival skills. And so you're thinking, okay, I'll just hold my bag a little bit closer. I'll cross the street. I'll go into a store. These are the three things that you usually think about when you see a person with pink hair behind you, is like, how do I get out of this situation? Now, I want to reiterate here that that person with pink hair literally just has pink hair. There's really no difference. But the thing is that society has made you believe that they are bad people. And so because of that, you have bought into this socially constructed belief of people with pink hair. But the one thing I can tell you is that this is also the moment where you're consciously making a decision. So when you have the options of holding your bag a little bit closer, crossing the street, or going into a store nearby, there's another thing that comes through your mind every single time, which is don't act. And that's the one moment that I want to pause there. Now, the reason for that is that usually when we think of people, well, in this scenario, people with pink hair, the reason that people are afraid of them is because they're not around people with pink hair at the time. And so because of that, then what ends up happening is that they don't know better. They don't know. And the other thing is they don't know how to question their unconscious beliefs and biases. But say, for example, you come across a YouTube video and there's a person with pink hair talking about how hard it is to be someone with pink hair. Because every time someone looks at you, they think of you as a criminal. And that your whole existence is people always being afraid of you. They're afraid that you always see them clutching their bag, crossing the street, going to a store, and how hard it's been on your life because of this socially constructed belief and how much it's impacted their life. Now, you saw that video on YouTube, and that is something that gets added to that list of, clutching your bag a little bit closer, crossing the street, going to a store. Now you have another one, which is don't act. But the reason that you have that in the first place is because you watched that YouTube video of someone talking about being someone with pink hair and how much it's impacted their lives because people see them as criminals all the time. And that is the time when people make the action, the choice of what is best. And that's a conscious decision. and then they take action. So whatever one that they decide on, it goes back to, their amygdala tells it to simmer down or to act on the action. But I want you to understand something is that there are people out there that when they hear someone's personal story and explain of how hard it is to be them, it challenges the socially constructed belief. Scientifically, that's the only way you can actually rewire someone's brain on a stereotype or a belief, is by making them question it by hearing actual stories, real personal stories, face to face like this. And this is one of the reasons that we came up with this Hacker Stories project. So feel free to go to Hacking Not a Crime and catch these videos. Basically, we wanted to showcase what hackers are. And if you don't know of a hacker, guess what? Now you'll learn everything you can about hackers, why they got into it, and the issues that they faced. Because the public doesn't know what we look like. They don't know our characteristics. They don't understand that because they don't see that. They're not aware of that. And because of that, it keeps us in this really, really hard place. So let's talk a little bit further of how to influence the public perception of hackers. You now know cognitive science, you know how socially constructed beliefs work, but I really want to reinforce that socially constructed beliefs stem from the media, period. And if you don't know what media is, it is the press. It is also marketing. It's social media. So all your socially constructed beliefs are made around because of the media and because of the imagery that we see. Whenever we type in ethical hacker versus criminal hacker, we see the exact same thing. And even the terminology being used still to this day, when it's someone who has done something wrong, they use the term hacker instead of attacker. And this is why, for the longest time, hackers have been using security researcher instead of hacker as their term. And it really, really, really does hurt that the media doesn't know the difference between the two, because we get stories like this. Hackers don't do this stuff. Hackers prevent these things from occurring because they got morals in a sense, but also they understand the graveness of their actions. So it's really important that we work with the press because we need them to get on our side. And the only way you could do that is correct them. Because the reality is that as a reader yourself, the only way that you challenge a reporter is by presenting the facts. So remember, when you want to change the situation, you want to be kind because they don't know better, because they weren't told this earlier on. Because usually when they find out, oh, I've been using the wrong terminology, I'm not doing my job right. So that is a good reporter. A good reporter will do that. So DM, comment publicly, remember, and also feel free to tag us and we'll help you out. Don't go out alone if you don't feel like it. Here are some examples. Now, the reason is that we have to call it out. If we don't, who's going to? And we have to challenge this term, because the reality is it's the term that is holding us back. It's the socially constructed beliefs of that term that's holding us back. But also you need to call it out on marketing. There's been plenty of companies, even in our own industry, that use the wrong marketing. They use the dark imagery, and it's the male with their ski mask on, and it's a headache, you guys. I don't know what else to tell you. But the thing is that we also give them kudos when they get it right. And that's something that you can do too. When someone uses the right terminology, it helps us in return. Also, you can always send a copy, a letter to the copy desk, which is, we did this to the New York Times around the holidays to remind them to please don't use these terms anymore because of this. It's not helping us get rights or even to have a conversation of rights. Because I don't know about you, but you know what ends up happening when you tell someone you're a hacker at an event, pre-COVID, okay, pre-COVID, not in person right now. But before then, when you tell someone that you're a hacker or you work in the hacker community, they take a step back, their jaw kind of drops sometimes, their eyes get a little bit bigger, or they're just really, really, really confused because they're like, why are you telling me this? You're a criminal and I'm next to a criminal. Why are you doing this? I don't understand. And usually, or they just try to exit the conversation really fast because they are afraid of you. Trust me, say it in jury duty next time you're there. Be like, so what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a hacker, or I work with hackers. See what ends up happening. Guarantee you, they don't want you to be participating because they're already like, nope, not going to touch that one because of these beliefs. Now, the other thing is that if you are providing comments to the press, it's important to always recognize and use the right terminology. So every time I talk to a reporter about hackers versus attackers, I always mention to the reporter, when I mention, please make sure that in your story, you use the term hackers when referring to good people and attackers for those that are doing something bad. It's really important that you do that because every time there's a news story that comes out that the hacker did this and it's really, really terrible, you put us back 10 feet and we want to keep going forward right now. And the other thing I always tell people is please don't wear a hoodie when on camera. And that's really because it's just challenging a socially constructed belief or stereotype. Because the results of the media really does impact, because right now we're looking at 94% of the Forbes Global 2000 don't have vulnerability disclosure policies. That's right. They don't want to work with hackers because they're afraid of hackers. And that 1 out of 4 hackers do not report vulnerabilities because they're afraid that if they do, they're going to be handed a lawsuit. Or the other thing is that even when they report it, what ends up happening is that they don't know who to contact because the contact information isn't listed. Now, let me tell you about this nightmare situation that happens all the time. So you find a vulnerability, you go to a website to go and report it to the company, and you're looking everywhere for vulnerability disclosure policies. You don't see anything. You're like, okay, let me see who else I can contact then to tell them about this vulnerability. So you end up spending hours, days, sometimes a week to try to find a contact information to report a vulnerability that they don't have a vulnerability disclosure policies at all. And you're already putting your neck out there in the first place because we know what ends up happening is that hackers are handed lawsuits all the time because of this situation, even though they're just trying to help and serve and protect, letting them know, hey, you've got a situation here you need to take care of. Now, the thing to note is that those that do report it, sometimes they'll just go directly to the social media channels. And let me tell you what ends up happening. You send a DM to a company, and guess who runs the social media platforms? It's marketing. Do you think marketing knows the right security, folks? No. Do you think that they have a protocol to let someone know? No. And this is the reason why things don't get resolved faster, but this is also one of the reasons why having a vulnerability disclosure policies allows you to have better transparency so that the hacker can communicate with you a lot more effectively. So you can keep protecting your company and your assets. Now, the other thing is to note is that because of the public perception of who we are, there is no laws right now that are protecting us. We have laws instead that work against us. We also have been seeing prosecuting hackers, and this is by companies, not federal as much, okay? Since 2017, it's been less of federal cases. It's been more of local, state, and companies going after you. Now, the other thing is that the impact has increased also the number of bad actors, because I don't know if you know this, but when you're a little kid and someone's like, oh, you're a bully, you're always a troublemaker, and you keep saying it over and over to the kid gets to a point where you're like, fine, I am the bully, I am the troublemaker, whatever you say I am, I will do that thing, because YOLO. I don't know why, but anyway, this is the same kind of practice that if you're trying to be a decent person and you're a hacker, you're trying to protect and serve, but yet every single person is seeing you as a criminal. And every time that you stick your neck out, that someone is going to hand you a lawsuit, you better believe that you're setting up a situation where people don't want to be a hacker anymore. Instead, they're like, fine, if this is the way you're going to see me, I'm going to do what I do best. I love hacking, but I'm going to do it to serve myself now. And that's the thing that scares me the most. Now, the other thing is that public perception, the media, does influence legislation and organizations as well. That's why vulnerability disclosure policies are super important. But how you influence is to acknowledge that right now the laws prevent good hacking in the same way that they prevent attackers. And we really need good hacking, you guys. Because we have this law called the CFA, the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, which was enacted in 1984 when Ronald Reagan, seen in this photo, a comic version of him, basically saw this movie called The War Games, and he went in complete panic mode. That's right, he created this law in 1984 that still sits today without any changes, but is used usually to prosecute. It's extremely vague. There's plenty of redundancies in it, but the one thing you need to know the most is that it doesn't even mention the term hacking or hacker in the entire thing, but it's used against hackers all the time. And around the world, you'll see anti-hacking laws like the CFA around because of it. And unfortunately, the one thing that I'll have to admit is that because the way that the CFA is done, it allows someone to be prosecuted multiple times for the same act. And this was the case when Aaron Swartz, if you don't know his case, you really need to know about it, because it is a wake-up call of how much we need a change more than ever, because he died from suicide because he was in this long legal battle that he didn't know whether or not it was going to end. And they even threatened him that he would serve like his 35 years in prison. I want you to understand this, that in a murder trial, it's 25 years. He was facing 35 years for just doing hacking. You have to pause there to be like, does that really seem fair? So Aaron Swartz's case is one of the reasons of why CFA need to be revisited. And so there was this opportunity called the Aaron's Law that came out from his passing, and it looked like it was going to go far. But then what ended up happening was some big tech companies started lobbying and then prevented that from occurring. And so what ended up happening was that the Aaron's Law was supposed to protect ethical hacking, and it was going to be used to only prosecute bad actors, not good actors. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. But it's the closest that we've gone to changing the CFA. Because the reality is, until we need to have, you know what, let's just be real. We need improvements to legislation. You know, all Forbes Global 2000 should have a VDP at this point. 100% of hackers should be able to have the ability to report vulnerabilities, because imagine if 1 out of 4 only reports a vulnerability, imagine if they reported every single time. Do you know how safe we would be? Like, it would take it to a whole different level. The other thing is that laws should be encouraging good hacking, because I'll be honest with you, you know how many cases where hackers save government and also big companies? A lot. There's a lot of cases, and a lot of the times it's not in the news because they prevented it from going into the news because they did a good job. They prevented a big breach from occurring. And that's the thing that we need to recognize, is that hackers are there to protect and serve and to make sure we have a safe place online. And that's the thing, is that we have to start recognizing them for what they've done for our community and for the world. So what can you do? You might be asking. Is be bold and kind. The one thing I can tell you is that changing someone's mind of a very deep-rooted socially constructed belief, it takes time, but also it's also being bold at the same time. Be kind, have your facts ready and stand by, but also to acknowledge that you have to speak up. If we don't speak up, then how will anyone ever hear you and the bad things that are happening in the world? But also be kind, because people don't know better a lot of the time, unfortunately. Also go vote. Like, you should have no excuse not voting. Like, I don't know about you, but you gotta vote. If you want to talk about politics and you have the right to vote and you're not voting, I think you need to look at yourself, because it's really voting the representation that can help change where we stand today. Voting matters. Your vote actually matters. That's why there's so many ways that people are trying to suppress voting right now, because voting matters. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to do so much to prevent people from voting. Also, know your local representatives. This is important. You should know who represents you. And you know what you should do? Contact them. And if you don't know where to find them, this is where you find them. But really, contact them, get a meeting with them. And when you do, contact Hacking is Not a Crime. We'll have one of our advocates go and join you in the call. Don't go at it alone. There's a reason why our community came together, is to protect one another, and we have each other's back. But also, it's important to address the one thing, which is how to collab with organizations. So we talked about legislation, a little bit of organizations, but now we went into media. But the one thing I have to admit, once again, I want to reinforce this, because if you work at a company that doesn't have a vulnerability disclosure, you need to start having that conversation. Also, to be honest with you, is that if you do have a vulnerability disclosure policies at where you work, you can always make it better. Never stop. And the reason why I say you need to have vulnerability disclosure is because it reduces breaches. It also puts the forefront the issue that we are struggling in InfoSec, which is the reason why bug bounty is doing so well is because it uses everyone around the world from all diverse backgrounds to try to find vulnerabilities. Because let's be real, usually on your security team, people usually might have the same background. And because of that, they're not going to catch all the vulnerabilities that people outside of their backgrounds can find. So diverse backgrounds does have this ability to find bugs. And also it's there to protect your security team so it doesn't miss things. But it also allows this bilateral trust agreement between organizations and the hackers to keep security in check. But also, let's be real, scanners, you can't always rely what to prioritize all the time and what to patch. So this is one of the other reasons why a good security program includes bug bounty and vulnerability disclosure, because it allows you to have that extra resilience there. So how can you improve if you do have vulnerability disclosure policies? Is to state what's in scope, what's out of scope. And don't write it for attorneys, write it for English learners, because there are hackers around the world that English is not their first language. And also every time you read your terms and conditions for an Apple product, I'm pretty sure you're not actually reading it because they own your soul. It was in the very fine print at some point. No, just kidding. But honestly, I don't think we usually read them. And the reality is because it's written for another attorney to understand. So we have to do better at that. Having contact information so we don't spend hours or days and weeks to try to contact you to report something. But also communication with every update. Hackers will want to know, are you fixing it? What's going on in the fixing? How can I help? They're constantly wanting to be there for you, and they're very eager to help and assist. And also have a dedicated person to manage, prioritize, and task. And if you can't, then actually do look at those platforms such as like BugCrowd and HackerOne, because they're able to help you on that front if you don't have a designated person. They have like this crawl, walk, run method. Also get involved with disclose.io if you want to improve your vulnerability disclosure policies. It's really, really important to do that because it's trying to bring kind of like a safe harbor atmosphere. And besides disclosure, volunteer and give. At the reality, you have all these wonderful organizations that could always use a volunteer, or even if you want to donate just a little bit, these organizations could use your help because we're all right now trying our best to fight for rights. And it's very hard to do that when, you know, in the middle of a pandemic in many ways, because you have to cover administration costs. And it's a lot in the end. So summary of this, and I'm looking so forward to these questions that you guys have, but if you want to get involved to change hacker rights and to do something about it, get involved by visiting our website. Also become an advocate. We just make sure that you have to have a referral. So it has to be an advocate that's already existing to refer you to become an advocate. It's our way of having like a friend-to-friend background check. Also volunteer and support orgs that are working to help the community. Always feel free to record a video and participate in our Hacker Stories project, because that's the only way you're going to change these socially constructed beliefs is telling your story of like why you want to become a hacker, what you do, and what are the issues that you have been facing because of it. And also help us work with the press. The press wants to know how to do better. They want to know that they're reporting accurately. And so keeping them informed and being there to let them know which is the right terminology to use, they're actually quite thankful for it as long as you aren't being a jerk. So be kind to them and be understandable. And remember to have empathy and be kind. You cannot, it's very hard to go anywhere in this world and make any change if you don't try your best to have empathy and be kind to one another. Because the reality is that change starts with you and me. And the reality is that more than ever before, we have to get this done. We have to, because we all know someone who ended up having to face a lawsuit at some point or had to go through a really rough time. And we know about Aaron Swartz's case too. So thank you guys so much for existing. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this topic. It's so important. Feel free to follow me, DM me, whatever, on Instagram or on Twitter. That is my handle. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Wow, lots of good information there. Thank you, Chloe. Or Chloe, sorry.
No problem.
Still working on that. All right, we had a question earlier from Martin. What are your thoughts on the certification of ethical hacker, the CEH, or what are your thoughts around that terminology being used as a certification?
Sure. So I would first say on the certification of becoming an ethical hacker, you may not like to hear this, but let's be realistic with one another. Do you think attackers have certs? Do you actually think they have certs? Or maybe they actually do have a cert in ethical hacking. At the reality of the end of the day, it's up to you if you want to get a cert. It really is. It depends on your learning, your skill set, how you think and process information. It's up to you. But the reality is that a lot of the hackers that are advocates, they don't have a certification in ethical hacking, because what they do is they know what the limits are. They know the rules. They follow the rules and the guidelines, and they make sure that they're always hacking with good intent. Now, on the terminology of ethical hacker, the reason we dropped ethical part to it was because hacker already is ethical. They have an ethical intent of what they do. And that's why we dropped the ethical part, because it's just hacker in the end.
Yeah, that's what I noticed about your presentation was your definition of that word is essentially ethical hacker versus my problem with that word is that people use it for many definitions now. So I've seen it used to describe software developers as well. And it's almost become a search engine optimized like marketing dream word.
Oh yeah.
So do you feel like the proper usage of that term should be ethical hacker? Essentially, like the proper definition of it?
You could hear my puppy in the background. And by a puppy, I mean she's a 3-year-old Shiba. So not really a puppy, but very loud. I would say that I think when it comes to, we've been branding a lot of a hacker as someone who's being able to figure out things that people can't. Like they go around the ways of figuring things out, or they find shortcuts. So I always think of like attorneys, for example. Attorneys are great hackers. They know where the loopholes are in our law to make an argument. They also can find previous cases where they know how to win it. So, I mean, the reality is that I think the hacker community, we've always been pretty open to being about using the term hacker, as long as it's something like where you're doing it with a good intent at the end of the day, and just being creative. It's all about being creative, like just trying to think outside a box, being creative. And that's what being a hacker is all about, is using the skill set that you have to find ways how to do something different and sometimes better.
Very interesting. I have an interesting question here from one of our attendees who says, I'm not convinced that changing the way the media talks about hackers would actually change corporate posture towards hackers. Would there be a way to create an organizational black box that would protect sources and route vulnerabilities to specific corporations? Or is that just too risky for the hacker? I just don't think that challenging public or corporate entities on social media is really going to win the hearts and minds on a very critical but slightly niche public issue like this.
Well, I would say that the companies that you want to change things are the ones that have the lobbyists. Remember about Aaron's Law was that you had these lobbyists that came in and prevented Aaron's Law from becoming something of very reality, which would have protected and given us rights. So the thing is, it's more about you have to change the public perception, and how you do that is by reporting things, by putting things on social media. I mean, we are seeing these things happen all the time. There are human rights cases around the world where people are speaking up and companies join in. The reality is that companies play a very large role in politics. And by ignoring that, we're never going to have any change. So that's why we have to work with organizations and these big corporations, because they're the ones that also can give us even louder voice, because they have the pockets to talk even louder. They also have the reaches of talking to the press a little bit longer and more widespread. So that's why we want to work with companies and we want to change that. But you also have to work with the media and organization and legislators to really bring it about a change. You can't just go one direction. You have to go all three of those directions at the same time.
I want to add to Melanie's question next here is, are there examples of either companies or even like whole countries that have adopted legislation protecting these ethical hacks or hackers in a positive way?
Yeah, I would say that there have been definitely companies that are really thankful that a hacker reported a vulnerability because it prevented them from having a very large breach. But I would also say if you really want to get a long list of those companies, go to disclose.io. It's a community source list that lists every single company that has a practicing vulnerability disclosure policies. That means that they're putting hackers, they acknowledge hackers that they need them to be able to keep being secure within their own companies and to be able to keep growing as a company as well.
The next question is, how difficult is it to advocate for changes in the CFA if it looks like both parties have no interest in it? And this person cites how both recent elections were claimed to be fraudulent due to outside interference.
Yeah, I would say that on this front is that the reality is that hacker rights, we haven't really seen if it's a Democratic issue or if a Republican issue. So I just want to put that out there, is that it's kind of something that goes across, which is really rare. It's very rare to find something like that. It's across the party. And the reality is the reason that it hasn't been really talked about is because, and this is something that you probably need to know, is that majority of your legislators have absolutely zero experience in cybersecurity, period. And that is one of the reasons why we haven't had conversations really about it, is because there's hardly been any legislators that have experience in it or actually work within it. And I think that was one of the reasons, CISA was doing really, really well. By that, it's CISA. But what they were trying to do was to get local governments and all the federal agencies to start doing vulnerability disclosure policies and to actually partner with the hacker community. And they successfully did that. They pushed and rolled this out all of last year. So it's something to look at, is that even government agencies are like, hey, we need to do something about this right now, but they also have to try to get the legislators to acknowledge that that's something else. And I think right now the pandemic is like the #1 priority right now. But if you want to follow along, there is a case at the Supreme Court where the CFA is being revisited at this time. So I really recommend is checking that one out.
Yeah, I think you just answered the next one, which was whether there's current legislation that we can vote on just as normal people in society. And that's been my frustration, is I always wonder why we even need representatives when technology has completely outpaced the level of expertise in our representatives. And I think you make a really good point there. I think that's very compelling, that it's a question we should be asking is, why can't the people with expertise and with vested interest in this field essentially construct the proper legislation around this field? I think that's a huge question. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll give you an example. I was in DC 2 years ago, and there was this panel going on. There was legislators on there and a couple of people in tech, lobbyists. And when I was sitting there, one of the legislators brings up 5G and how 5G is going to make our security systems much worse. And the entire time kept dropping machine learning and blockchain. It was just one of those moments where you're sitting there and you're realizing that even the people in tech themselves, and we already know this in tech, is that security doesn't come first. But the other thing is that these legislators didn't even know, they knew about the terms, but they didn't understand the depth of those terms that were being used. They didn't understand security, but they were also making sure that they didn't come off that they didn't know something. And I think that's one of the things that was really eye-opening in many ways.
Yeah, so it's almost like there's only certain paths to certain channels to affect real legislation, which is lobbyists is probably the biggest one. And then I guess your representatives, of course. But aside from that, I guess activism, advocacy, which seems to be your suggested path.
Yeah.
Martin was asking, what was the name again of that Supreme Court case?
Yeah, Van Buren versus the U.S. And it was visited at the end of November. I really recommend listening to those recordings of the opening. It's one of those really hard cases too, because it's a case that you wish wasn't the case that brings CFA to the front door, because it's a dirty cop. It's a story about a dirty cop and the US using the CFA against him. And it's not a case that you wish that they were using as the prime example of why CFA needs to be reevaluated, but it is the first time in a long time the CFA is being revisited at the Supreme Court.
So next question here is from Virginia Jacob, and who says, my courses listed in LinkedIn are listed as ethical hacker. These should be correct then. What do you think?
I would say if they are your courses that you develop, that is up to you. And I know that not too many people know of the ethical hacker transforming into just hacker phase. And so I understand if you're trying to get people to participate and be part of that coursework because of the title. Believe me, I understand that. I've been in marketing. So it's up to you at the end of the day, but I would say like in your description, you can say a little bit further about it, how like this is a course to learn whatever the course is about the hacker ways of blah, 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 blah instead. So you can still call it ethical hacker, but also in the content that you have, make sure to state at some point saying, please note that this is, by being a hacker, you're already ethical. And that the ethical part before hacker is not necessary. And just saying that is usually okay.
That reminds me of all of the marketing questions I have for Tony at CSMP, because I don't know that many like cyber marketers who understand that part of the space. So that reminds me of that. A question from Jesse, is there a proposed law that is actually written that we can use to advocate with our legislators as it is?
Unfortunately, there is not right now. But if you want, you can always use Aaron's Law and use his story as a way to start having that conversation. I think Aaron's Law is definitely a close example of what we want, but I think the whole conversation has to be why we need to revisit CFAA, because one, it's really out of date. 1984, no changes have occurred. Just think about Y2K. It's not even incorporated in there. I mean, the internet as we know it is not even incorporated in there. So that's the thing, is like we need to revisit old legislation and make it more refreshed in a sense that are more about today's time, because it's out of date.
Yeah, I really hope that this kind of healthy advocacy can actually have influence on what seems to be a purchase your legislation environment at this point, or people who are a part of the system just become more powerful and issue things like executive orders, which some of those have been quite good. For example, executive orders that created these compliance frameworks in our space are actually quite good for defenders and for businesses who don't have a relevant cybersecurity framework. Some of those executive orders have been outstanding, I think, in actually contributing to this industry. But it's just a shame to think that we have this system that it seems so disconnected from the needs of people like us who are actually thinking about what this space needs to look like and what the incentive structure should be. Where so many people are actually thinking about this, but it's not really translating. And so I think you've raised so many good points and informative issues here. I'm really glad you're able to join us, because I actually didn't know about the Aaron Schwartz case myself. So I thought that was extremely helpful. And it's almost like a more severe case than Edward Snowden, his case of having to flee the country. And even I don't know if you polled the public what their thoughts would be on Edward Snowden. I don't know if it's still like 50-50.
I think it's still 50-50. It depends, because I think it has a lot to do if you formerly worked for NSA or like any of those government agency, or you served at some point. I feel like that Snowden kind of was a betrayal for those folks. But then you have those that did not participate in those agencies, but some have, but they don't see him as that. They see him as someone who opened the door to have a deeper conversation and to really raise some concerns.
Interesting. Martin wants to poll the audience, but I think we're at the end of our time just about. I just think this is there's so much room to explore this topic. And my concern is that us normal people will be exploring this to death, and we might come across answers, but how we get those answers into action, that's the part that really concerns me. And I think that probably concerns a lot of people, I imagine.
Yeah, well, I would say that if you want to do something, is don't create your own organization. I know that sounds really weird, but it's something I've learned, is that you don't need to create another organization that does the same stuff as you. You know what you should do is partner with other organizations, volunteer your time, get on their board if you want to, and really bring about a change at that organization, because they already have the infrastructure and the knowledge that you may not have to be able to move that forward even faster.
Yeah, I like that idea. I found that we all have like our little bubbles of influence, and those are great places to speak your thoughts, the things that you really believe in. And I think that's healthy for sure. We're at time, but thanks so much, Chloe, for joining us and going over this, and thanks everyone in the audience for stopping by our Wednesday webinar. And we have, I believe, a presentation from this CISO series. I believe that's tomorrow evening, so check that out if you'll be around tomorrow. And we also have a upcoming Wednesday webinar in the series from Code Fellows. So this next class little workshop is going to be sniffing traffic with Wireshark. So if you've never played around with packet capture, definitely check out the upcoming webinar from our instructor Javon over here at Code Fellows. So that is coming up. Be sure to follow us on Eventbrite to keep an eye on our events, and as well as LinkedIn. And I should ask you, Chloe, are you comfortable uploading this to YouTube?
Yeah, happy to spread the word, and feel free to spread it anywhere. We need everyone to know about this topic at this point.
I mean, at the very least, to talk about it in the mainstream, and even that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Even if we don't all agree, I think these are things people should talk about.
Yep,
so
definitely.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us. This is David with CSMP, And it's been a pleasure having you all tonight. And thanks again, Chloe.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.